Mr. Warner, thank you so much for doing this for us. I started doing this series to bring a spotlight to people that are have been extremely influential to the shooting sports. And every time I do a an interview, I ask them to nominate somebody that has helped them, or they think about somebody that would potentially share information that would help, up and coming shooters, or possibly shooters that have been struggling for a long time, trying to get that consistency, because a lot of people can get small groups every now and then. It's the consistency factor that really is what, as competitors, we are chasing, and a lot of us have kind of reached that to a certain degree. But there's people that they'll shoot a small group today and then they can't get it to repeat for a long time. So
Yeah, I find with new shooters that's quite prevalent, and I think a big part of that is that it's multifaceted, but most of it is that they're over anxious, and it's very difficult. I find at times, it depends on the person, to slow them down and say, look, only make one change at a time and prove it out. I see people make two or three changes at the same time, and they don't know which influenced what they saw as a result.
right. So, Mr. Warner, before we get started, tell my viewers who you are, what you do, and kind of your background,
Oh,
they can start to understand
sure.
why you have been so influential to the game.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you taking the opportunity to come to me for this. This is really nice. My name is Al Warner. I've been running Warner Tool Company since 1989. And how I got started in that to bring product to the shooting sports that would enhance everybody's ability. And what I started was making the peep sight, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Um, I stopped making that peep sight about 5 or 6 years ago because the NRA changed the rules and ruined the market. But in that 30-year period or so, 28 years, whatever it is, I earned a reputation with that site around the world as that is the site that everybody compared everything else to. So it held a gold standard. And I think a big part of that reason is that I put a lot of effort into putting my knowledge into my product, and I'm very particular about what does and doesn't go out the door. It's not right, it doesn't leave. That's all there is to it. Some other experiences in the shooting sports is I was armorer for the Palma team a couple of times around New Zealand 25 years ago. Um, and one other time, which I wasn't quite as involved, but I was still the armorer. I learned a lot from those guys. I was a pretty new shooter to competitive shooting in 95 because I only got back into it in the mid 80s when my son was a kid. And hanging out with those guys taught me a lot, taught me a whole lot. Um, and I built lots of Palmer rifles in those years. And for a string of about, I'd say 7 or 8 years, the top 20 guns in the Palmer match at Perry, 80% of them were mine. So that's where most of my experience is. It's diversified from that. Since we stopped making sights, we now make solid projectiles for competitive shooting for the ELR guns. Currently up to a 458 caliber bullet. And we build a lot of rifles for the ELR shooters these days.
So, what is your line of projectiles called?
Flatline.
Flatline. Okay.
Flatline projectiles. Yeah, we make from 6 millimeter. We have a 6 millimeter bullet, and it goes all the way up. We have one 7 millimeter, which we want to expand, maybe make two more. And then a line of 30 caliber bullets, two 338 bullets, two 375 bullets, and 416s. We've got two, and the new 458, which is still in prototype testing, which is showing really good promise. But it's the same basic contour design as the rest of them. The efficiency of those bullets is phenomenal. The BCs that we publish that are on the website are garnered from independent testing at University of New Mexico with Dave Emory. Okay, cost us a lot of money to get that done, but we do it. We do it because we want an independent evaluation of our projectiles to present to the market. I don't think anybody else does that.
So your background, I mean, so you got involved with the Pommel team and you started making peep sights. Now you're making projectiles. What is your background like?
Oh, well, I started as a kid in an apprenticeship program for tool making, and I proceeded in that pursuit for 4 or 5 years. I started when I was 16, and as I got a little older, I decided I needed to race motorcycles. So I did that for a while, twisted wrenches on bikes and raced. And then when I started a family, I was busy doing all that stuff, but I was still working in shops, building plastic injection molds and stamping dies and investment casting molds. So I've got a lot of machine shop background. I've been doing it a long, long time. That's basically my background.
So you were a tool maker, machinist.
Yeah.
So you're used to dealing with very precise measurements, and everything has to be precise.
Yeah, in comparison, doing gun work is I can do it with my eyes closed as far as the tolerances go.
Yeah.
It's not difficult work. You just, like anything else, you just have to be meticulously careful to achieve your goal. That's all.
Right. There's very few things in gunsmithing that really matter. For example, tolerances wise, you have to be as concentric as possible, right? But I mean, the threads have a huge, I'm going to say huge because, as compared to what you're used to, but, threads have about depending, if you do a class 3, what is that, about 5,000, 6,000 tolerance?
Maximum is about, it depends on the diameter, but the maximum is about 4.
Yeah, okay, so 4,000 tolerance.
That's pretty sloppy.
Yeah, and even Headspace, and I understand you don't Headspace between go and no go. I'm sure you have a specific tolerance that you hit, but I mean the Headspace tolerance is fairly large, which is why people encounter issues, I think.
Yeah, it is. I think part of it is people don't know how to measure it to begin with. I have to teach them how to measure it. And when I'm building a rifle for somebody, whether it's a Pommel rifle or cross a course rifle from a long time ago or the new stuff now, on competition rifles, I always Headspace to 0 to +1. If I'm building a cop gun, I'll make it +2 to +3 because I've run into encounters where police departments have, they buy ammo by the case, and I've had 2 or 3 times in history deliver a gun to a department, and they come back to me a week later and say, "Hey, I can't get this in my gun." And the reason is that the factory ammo is long in Headspace. I go, "Oh, Christ."
Right.
So,
So you touched on something about mastering Headspace, which is, I mean, I learned from Speedy. That's where I learned how to gunsmith. And he taught me how to measure Headspace, in a chamber. And the key word here is measure, because I see a lot of gunsmiths that they do the whole, it feels perfect. You can't feel perfect. Can you?
Well, yeah, you can. Okay, you can, and that's really based on experience. And the other really, really important part of putting a good rifle together is making sure that you have 90% or better engagement on the lugs.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really important.
Right.
But yeah, you can feel it, and that's, if you did it every day, you would become more accustomed to it.
Okay.
I've been doing that kind of stuff every day for 40 years.
Okay.
So I know what it's supposed to feel like. And guys like Speedy probably feel it that way too, because he's been doing it that long. I'm sure he's familiar with it. Now, it really irritates me, and I don't have any hair left to pull out, but I would if I had, when I hear guys talking about using a fired case to measure Headspace. I go, no.
Yeah.
Buy a gauge or learn how to measure it with a steel ball. Okay.
Yeah, I use a gauge and I measure from the with an indicator,
Uh-huh.
to the back of the gauge, and that's how I set my headspace. Just you know,
Sure.
that's how I learned how to do it, and I can't. I just don't know. Plus, my actions are glued in, so I don't have the option to test the action. They're glued into my stocks, so
Oh, yeah, right.
everything has to be measured.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the I'm glad you brought up the fired case to set headspace because I hear that all the time, and I used to comment on those threads, and now I just scroll right past them because it brings nothing good to argue with those guys.
No, it doesn't. And that's fine if it's your gun and you know what it is. It's just like if your headspace is long. If it's a little long, but it's your gun and you're loading for it, you can adjust your dies to accommodate the proper setback from wherever it is to what you want. But don't expect to sell that gun to somebody and not be responsible for it if the guy has a problem because you created the deviation from the normal industry standards.
It's an improved cartridge at that point.
Well, yeah, of course it is. I run into brass all the time when I make dies from people whose chambers have been chambered long. When brass comes in here and I measure it to make dimensions for what I'm going to do to make the die, I don't measure headspace on every piece of brass that comes in here. I take a rimmer print, and I look at the number and I build it to that number for the length of the body. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to run the guy's brass into the die when I've got it done to test it and set it up, and I either crush it because the headspace on the brass is 10 thousandths long, or I don't touch it at all because it's 7 thousandths short.
Right.
And they don't know, but I find out.
How far do you let the go gauge stick out of the bottom of the die?
I build the dies with 0 shims in them, which is the shortest headspace, to be -5. Okay.
Yeah, but you have to stick the bottom of the gauge from the bottom of the die so that it'll accommodate the shell holder and all that. How far does it usually stick out at the bottom? Do you know what I'm asking?
It's the nominal 1/8 inch for a shell holder on standard cartridges.
Yeah, 125. Yep,
125.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because when I started, I didn't know anything. I was just like everybody else. I was just trying to make good ammunition, and when I started learning about bumping shoulders and all that, I ran across a lot of dies, and hindsight, I blame the die automatically, but it may have been that the chamber was chambered too short, because I was always having to shave the bottom of the dies.
And that's where being able to measure your brass when it comes out of the gun is important, because you can't, if you don't know where you start, you don't know where you're going to end up.
Correct. So, and I remember I used to always have to shave the bottom of the die. Always. It seemed like, and like I said, once I started chambering my own rifles, and I learned from Speedy how to gunsmith, I hadn't even thought about it until right now. Then I'm like, I didn't have to ever do that again ever since then. So it's that's the beauty about doing my own work, and recognizing from the get-go that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this as perfect as possible, and I don't know how to do that. So that's why I seeked out and I went and took classes from Speedy.
Sure.
And everything's been, as we say in Texas, honky-dory ever since.
Yeah,
so
it's all interesting, and I run into people from every end of the spectrum, from engineers who understand what's going on to people who, some of them, in my opinion, shouldn't be allowed near a gun, but they have one. Okay, and I'm going to teach them how to use the dies.
So you make dies, and tell me why you came up with that die, because that is. You know who Steve Blair is? Stephen Blair.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
He just, the minute die topic comes up, is get a Warner. Like, get a Warner die. Don't look at anything else. And I've seen your dies, and they are just a piece of art. number one, why did you make the die? And number two, why did you deviate from the standard 7/8 14? You know, and that's, I always say that 7/8 14 is like the worst thing they could have done to that die, because you're always trying to adjust headspace in very minute increments, but you have a coarse thread, which is, anyway. Why did you deviate from that, I'm going to say design, the standard design, and then just went in another direction? Did you recognize the limitations of the 7/8 14?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't the thread pitch at all that did it. What it really was my criteria for designing the die was to make it modular, so you can interchange the inserts within the series that housing will hold. So, you know, if you're sizing your 6BR and now you want to size your 308, all you got to do is swap out the inserts and change the shim for the headspace dimension, and you can change it over to do a different caliber. So you only need one housing.
Right.
Okay?
But you did compensate for the thread pitch by using shims.
No, what the shims do is control the headspace in the die. Okay, so with no shims in the die, the nominal headspace is -5.
Okay.
And I supply shims in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5,000 stick.
Okay.
So you can lengthen the headspace in the die itself. So you're always putting the same preload on the bottom of the die, so you have the same amount of force every time you put a piece of brass in.
Right.
And by changing the shims, you change the amount of setback in relationship to where it starts, how hard the brass is, how soft the brass is, how it's reacting when it goes in a die.
Yeah, what I was saying is, on your dies, you don't have to loosen the die and turn it to set headspace. You use shims.
Yeah, you can use shims.
Yeah.
Once you have the shim set up, you're done. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you shoot that same piece of brass 3 or 4 times, it's going to spring back more than it did when it was more fully annealed. Okay, and you can still size that brass, but you may have to change the shim stack to push that brass a little bit back, because generally on a match chamber where you're not expanding the neck extraordinarily amount like you are in a hunting gun, you can get away with annealing every second or third time. Okay, after the second time, or maybe after the third time, you may have to adjust the shim height, the stack height of the headspace in the die, because the brass springs back more because it's harder.
Right. So, what about just annealing every time?
I'm not convinced that that's necessary, and that depends entirely on how much you're work hardening the brass. And by work hardening the brass, where does it expand to from where it's loaded? Where does it go when you size it? How much are you moving it? Okay. If you're only, if you got 3,000 clearance in your neck to let the bullet go, and you're only sizing it back from the fired condition 4,000s to get your bullet press, you can get away with not annealing every time.
Yeah. What I found, just my personal,
consistency is what counts.
Right.
If you've got a group of brass where, these 45 have been fired twice and these have only been fired once, don't expect them to act the same if you treat them all the same in your die.
Yeah. So what I found for me is it's annealing doesn't hurt anything. Nope. It only helps. So I decided a long time ago that, you know what, I'm going to treat my brass I'm going to give it the exact same treatment every time it comes into my reloading room. And I anneal every time, and that, I'm going to call it a phenomenon where it doesn't spring back the same. Happens until my brass is pretty old, 12 to 15 reloads. Mm-hmm. Then I have to bump it an extra couple of thousands to get the same bump, because and I was doing flame annealer. Now I transitioned to the amp annealer. And the amp annealing guys tell me you will never have to worry about that again. That brass is going to be the same anneal every time, and you'll have the exact same bump until you lose your primer pockets. You never have to change the die. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, you'll enjoy that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's back to consistency, right?
Yeah, and consistent, and annealing is part of it, okay? Around here, this bigger brass, I mean, Dan and I are buying RWS 50 brass from the importer, and we are making it into other chambers. We're making it into 416 Barrett. We're making it into Steyr. I've made it into a couple of other Wildcats. I make it into the Wildcat that we make in a 416 for the ELR stuff. And I mean, and we've even sold it to some of the manufacturers that are loading ammo in those big gun cases so they can experiment with it. But we're making them in lots of, an individual customer will buy 100 or 200 pieces. I had one guy come to me and wanted 1,000 pieces. And when we make that brass, depending on the complexity and the design, sometimes I only have to close it down and trim it and turn it. And sometimes I have to open it up to expand it into a lesser body taper and then close it back down again. So there can be as many as 2 or 3 annealing steps in the process of making that brass. And I could not find an annealer that's designed at the reloader market that was capable of doing the kind of work that I needed on an annealer. And when I need to anneal 1,000 pieces of brass, I mean, I need to do it. I need to get it done.
Right.
I ended up spending $10,000 on a commercial annealer, and it does 50 caliber brass all day long, every 5.5 seconds. And they're all exactly the same. So annealing is extremely important.
Yeah. So speaking of chamber work, have you found certain techniques that you say help better with accuracy and precision than others? Like, back in the day, pretty much everything was chambered between centers, right? That was pretty much the standard.
I'm losing audio.
I said back in the day, can you hear me?
Yes.
I said back in the day, they used to always chamber between centers. That just seemed to be the common thing that everybody did. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, through the headstock is pretty common. I think it's probably the most common nowadays. Have you seen a progression in gunsmithing or chambering techniques that have improved the consistency of the rifles?
I don't particularly pay attention to what other people do. I chamber through the headstock. I can fully adjust where my center is. I can line the barrel up as well as you can expect. Okay, I can line it up within a tenth or two every time. Not a problem.
Right.
So I've always done it that way, and I've always run fluid through the back end of the barrel to flush while I'm reaming. Okay, that's the method I use, and I haven't deviated from it since I started.
Okay.
What other people do, I don't really pay attention to what other people do.
Well, that's the best way. Well, what I was asking is, okay, so even in your own experience, have you changed your method from day one until now? Have you found different tools, different things that possibly work better?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, things like trying different cutting fluids and whatnot. I've come up with a particular cutting fluid that I like the best. It's marvelous stuff because I get absolutely no buildup on the reamer at all. It's phenomenal. It's really nice stuff. So yeah, I mean, you experiment with stuff like that. I'll try this, I'll try that, but they're not major changes. As far as anything else goes, like pilot clearance, okay, on a piloted reamer. I always use a piloted reamer, and I always I always attempt to either select or make a pilot that's 2 to 3 tenths smaller than the minor diameter in the barrel, where it's going to be riding. Okay. Any more than that, getting a little tighter than that, you're going to run into trouble. Any looser than that, you start getting shattered. I find.
Do you want to share the name of the fluid?
If I could remember it, I would, but I can get it for you.
Okay, shoot me an email.
It's a Fuchs oil product.
Okay.
Fuchs, Fuchs.
Fuchs.
Fuchs, Fuchs. I can't remember the number, but I can find out for you and let you know.
Well, shoot me an email.
I will.
Okay, so you've experimented with piloted reamers, and you found what works the best, and this is really the key that I've seen, the constant, I guess, about people that have become like yourself, as good as it gets, or people compare your products. They hold your product as the gold standard. Is you guys are never satisfied with what you're doing. You're always experimenting,
Sure.
maybe minute things like, let me try 10,000 smaller. Let me try this different fluid. You're always experimenting, trying to find the next thing, the next best thing. Are you at a point now where you just like, this is how we do it, or are you still testing different things? All right. Sorry about that. My internet took a dump.
That's all right.
Okay. So what I was asking was, you over the years, you've tested different things. You kind of found what works. Are you still testing on a day-to-day, or maybe every now and then you see a new product and you test it, or are you at the point where it said, no, we're done. This is what works. We're just going to keep doing this.
No, not at all. I mean, I try to learn. I try to learn every time I do something. Okay. When I was a kid and I was going through my apprenticeship, I learned from a lot of really, really sharp guys, okay, of my parents' age, that were the World War II generation. And the vast majority of them preached, it's not right, it doesn't go out the door. And they also preached, if a day goes by that you're doing this kind of work and you don't learn something, you're not paying attention. There's always something to learn. And I try to apply that to everything I do. Now, everybody has a bad day, and I'm getting old. I can't keep up with what the kind of workload that I used to. But I still try to learn progressively. From the last time I did this, I want to do this a little differently because I want to see how it's going to act. I'm always looking for a different avenue. When I do find a process that works really, really well, I will attempt to refine it. But I know that it works. I can always go back. So, but yeah, I'm always looking for a better way to do something.
How have components changed for the better, for the worse? I'm talking about like barrels, actions, stocks.
Well, everybody, in my opinion, everybody owes homage to the barrel makers, because the barrel maker, without a good barrel, there's no point in starting. And the barrel makers today are doing a phenomenal job. Same thing with components. Bullets are better, brass is better. I don't think powder has progressed nearly as much as it could. But I'm not a chemist, so I don't understand the chemistry behind gunpowder. But I know that there is experimentations going on, government-funded experimentations going on right now, where you and I may not have access to it for another 15 or 20 years, but we're going to be able to launch bullets at 5,000 feet per second. And that's going to be an improvement in gunpowder. That's going to be an improvement in barrel material. All that stuff is happening right now. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, I did an interview with Paul Phillips, and those guys are shooting 5 miles, 3-4 miles. And, they're not connecting every time, but they're still doing it, and they're learning a lot about it,
Yep. That's what it takes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting the things that are going on in the shooting world. like the benchers guys, they're still shooting tiny groups. They're not shooting the smallest groups in history, but they're shooting more consistently. The ags keeps getting smaller and smaller. And in F class, I remember when I started about 11 years ago, 12 years ago, we were a clean, which was a 200. Nobody was shooting cleans. The record at the time was a 199. And now, if it's calm or relatively mild, and if you're not shooting a clean, you don't stand a chance to win. Everybody's shooting cleans nowadays.
20 some years ago, when F class first started, when it first started taking off, and we had not gone to the half size scoring range yet. We were still shooting NRA prone target. My ex-wife shot the first 20x clean at 1,000.
Wow.
Very first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, and like I said, nowadays it just keeps getting better and better, which I like.
yeah. It intimidates a lot of people. It really does. And I try to encourage people. Listen, that guy didn't get to where he is by being lazy. He works at it. It's very, very intense. To be a competitor on a national level takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time and dedication. And some people expect that to come easily. Nothing that's worthwhile comes easy. You got to work for it.
Right. The mental fortitude is one that is extremely hard to come by unless you do it. You can shoot a good group. You can shoot, I mean, how many people go out and practice and they shoot these amazing groups, amazing scores, but then they go to competition and they fall apart because they don't have the mental fortitude to really handle the pressure. It's one thing shooting at your club or local range and another one shooting on what we call the big stage, the 1,000-yard range, 1,000-yard line against world champions, national champions, and all these guys that they're just not going to let up.
Well, you like me and a bunch of other people who do it all the time have been doing it long enough that when I was actively shooting competitively and did fairly well in F class, okay. Long before that, shooting prone, when I went to a match, whether it was a local match or whether it was a state championship or regional or the nationals, I didn't go there to compete with the other people. I went there to compete with me, because in the end, it doesn't matter what format you're competing, whether it's bench rest or prone or F class or shotgun, I don't care what it is, okay? You have to perform better than everybody else. And in order to do that, you need the discipline, the mental discipline and the practice to be able to hit your, to know how to hit your target, read the wind, launch a shot, make good shots, okay? And the bottom line is always, if I make less mistakes than you, I win.
Right.
That's all there's to it. It's simple as
Right. It's a game of consistency, right? It all boils down to consistency again. It doesn't matter that you can set a national record on the first target, but if you don't put all 8 targets together to make a good ag, you're not going to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they say, you don't win by shooting small groups. You win by not shooting big ones.
That's true. That's very true.
Well, Mr. Warner, I appreciate you doing this for us. I think a lot of people are gonna, number one, get to meet you and know what you do, and kind of know your background and the passion that made you what you are today. And I mean, everybody talks about Warner Tool knows it's going to be dead on or it's not going to happen. Like you said, it ain't going out the door. And I've known that for a very long time. And I was, when Gary said I should interview you, I was like, yes, that's a good suggestion.
The biggest problem around here, Gary, and it's true with a lot of people, is that it's very, very difficult in the business I'm in to find people who want to do or want to learn this kind of work out. Okay? Finding the manpower to be able to let somebody loose in my place to do the kind of work that I do around here just doesn't happen anymore. And you know, it's sad because the individual skills that you garner over a lifetime are being lost. I've been able to teach a few people, but it's not enough. It's just not enough.
Right. I don't know if you're aware, but I recently started my own manufacturing. I just bought one lathe. I just wanted to make products, kind of like yourself, that are going to propel a regular shooter. Just kind of give them the tools to make their life easier, right? There's just so much misinformation out there that it really takes somebody to know what they're doing to be able to weed it out. But if you don't know what you're doing, there's so much out there that's wrong. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, and people call me with questions all the time, and I'm sure you get questions too. I try to give people the basis for what they need to know to figure out what's going on. You would be amazed. Well, maybe you wouldn't be amazed at how many people don't understand how to control the bump in their die. Even though I've got it all written out, people don't read anymore.
Right.
So my son and I have been talking about making a video to put on our website, which is instructional, where people can see what it is. It would be much easier now. I take the time on the phone to explain to people how to set it up and what to look for and how to measure. And those people that ask, I give them a lot of credit. It's the people that don't ask that just keep bumbling down the road that you can't help because they don't ask.
Right. And videos, as you know, I mean, I make videos for that purpose because you make it one time, you put in the effort, and then it's out there and it's better than you can explain it, right? And they can be laying in bed at midnight and they can't figure something out. They just go watch the video, right? They can't call you. And you know how it is. We always have problems around midnight or on the weekends where you can't get a hold of anyone.
Yeah, I know. The guys going on Saturday to go shoot Sunday.
Right. And, a long time ago, because I'm back to that 7/8/14 thread where they tell you, just advance it a little more. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, this is stupid. So what I did is I started measuring from the base of the die to the lock ring and set that. And then I moved the lock ring, lock it down and measure. And then that's how I was able to keep track of how much I'm moving it precisely. This whole trial and error thing. I mean, you ruin 30 pieces of brass with excessive bump or whatever, you know what I mean? Trying to figure out just the correct bump. And I finally figured out, well, I'll just measure from the bottom of the die to the lock ring. And there it is, So now I can set a die in no time. And of course, your die uses shims, which is even better. But just different ways to skin a cat. But I had to come up with that. It took me being sick and tired of doing it the way everybody tells you to do it to finally come up with a better system. And so did you.
Yeah, well, you asked me about how I came about.
Well, looks like we lost Mr. Warner again. So I'm having issues with my internet connection. So I guess I'm going to sign off right here. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you guys appreciate these interviews that I've been doing. And keep them centered. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.